Jack Hardington stood over his poorly executed golf drive, his face a tapestry of frustration and disbelief. The ball sat mockingly on the grass, a mere shadow of the soaring shot he had envisioned. With an exasperated sigh, Jack retrieved his iron club. He swung it aggressively in the air, the blade slicing through a dandelion and a tuft of grass as though they were his sworn enemies. The ritual provided little solace. Resolving to do better, he focused on the ball again, determined to redeem himself. At 24 years old, Jack's priorities were divided between two demanding pursuits: perfecting his golf game and making a living. Unfortunately, the latter often overshadowed the former. For 5.5 days each week, he toiled away in the confines of a mahogany-paneled office in the city, a prison of paperwork and monotony. But the weekends were sacred. Every Saturday afternoon and Sunday, Jack devoted himself entirely to the pursuit of golf, his one true passion. His dedication even led him to rent a room near Stourton Heath's golf course, where he woke at dawn daily for an hour of practice before catching the 8:46 train to the city. But mornings were not Jack's ally. Despite his enthusiasm, the early hour left his coordination as sluggish as his pre-coffee mind. Drives were muffed, iron shots skimmed embarrassingly along the ground, and even putts betrayed him, requiring a humiliating 4 strokes to reach the hole. Frustrated but undeterred, Jack muttered under his breath, "Left arm, right through, and don't look up," before attempting his next shot. And then it happened. A piercing cry shattered the tranquil morning air. "Murder! Help! Murder!" The voice, high-pitched and unmistakably female, cut through the stillness before trailing off into a chilling gurgle. Jack froze, the club slipping from his fingers as he turned toward the sound. His heart raced, and adrenaline surged as he abandoned his game and sprinted toward the source. The cry seemed to come from a secluded area of the course, a rugged stretch of land bordered by woods and a few scattered cottages. Among them was a charming little house Jack often admired for its picturesque beauty, with ivy climbing its stone walls and a neatly tended garden. His instincts directed him there, and he rounded a heather-covered slope to find himself at its gate. In the garden stood a young woman. She wore a simple purple linen dress and clutched a small basket half filled with weeds. Her face, framed by dark, glossy hair, held a quiet elegance. Her eyes, a deep, velvety violet, meeting Jack's with a mix of surprise and annoyance. "I'm sorry," Jack blurted, his words tumbling over each other. "Did you cry out just now?" The girl's expression shifted to one of genuine bewilderment. No, indeed." Jack's confusion deepened. Her soft voice, tinged with a faint accent, was in stark contrast to the desperate scream he had heard moments earlier. "But you must have. It came from nearby. Here, surely." "I heard nothing," she replied, her tone steady and sincere. For a moment, Jack was at a loss. Her demeanor exuded calm, yet the cry had been so vivid, so unmistakable. He looked around, half expecting to find some sign of distress, a disheveled scene perhaps, or even a body. But everything appeared normal. The girl's garden was pristine, the cottage serene. "Do you want to search the house?" she asked dryly, arching an elegant eyebrow. Embarrassment flushed through Jack. He stammered an apology and retreated, convinced he must have misjudged the situation. The girl resumed her weeding, casting a single glance in his direction before returning to her task. Still shaken, Jack wandered into the woods, scouring the area for any sign of disturbance. He found none. The cry, so vivid and urgent, now felt almost like a hallucination. The rest of the day unfolded in a haze. Jack caught his train, arriving at work with barely a moment to spare. As he settled into his office, doubt began to creep in. Had he truly heard the cry, or had the stillness of the morning played tricks on his mind? That evening, he scoured the newspapers for any reports of crime or tragedy in the area. There were none. The next morning brought relentless rain, forcing Jack to forego his usual practice. Instead, he rose late, rushed through breakfast, and boarded his train in a gloomy mood. Again, he found no news of any incident. By the third morning, the rain had subsided, and Jack eagerly resumed his routine. As he passed the cottage, he noticed the girl in the garden once more, her hands busy among the flowers. He couldn't help but wonder if she remembered their odd encounter. Glancing at his watch, he noted the time, 7:25. The precise moment the cry had pierced the air 2 days earlier. A chill crept up his spine as he paused, half expecting what, he didn't know. And then it came again. Murder! Help! Murder! The same cry, the same anguished tone. Jack's blood ran cold. He spun around and raced back toward the cottage, where he found the girl standing at the gate. Her expression this time was different. Wide-eyed, startled. Yet, as Jack approached, she backed away, her gaze flickering toward the house as though seeking refuge. "You heard it this time," he exclaimed, desperation lacing his voice. But she shook her head, her features a mask of confusion. "I heard nothing," she said softly, her sincerity striking him like a blow. Jack stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief. Could he truly be imagining it? Or was something far more sinister at play? He couldn't tell. All he knew was that the mystery of the cry and of the girl with pansy-like eyes was far from over. Jack's mind whirled with a mix of emotions as he prepared for this pivotal moment. He had been living under the shadow of doubt, questioning his sanity and clinging to the hope that today's plan would provide clarity. The morning was crisp, the air carrying a faint chill that heightened his nerves. As he and Lavington approached the 7th tee, Jack stole furtive glances at his watch, each passing second a drumbeat of anticipation. He knew the exact moment was approaching, the fateful 7:25. His eyes swept over the garden as they passed the cottage, catching a glimpse of the girl. She was bent over her flowers, her posture serene, a stark contrast to the storm raging in his head. Her lack of acknowledgement unnerved him further, feeding into the spiral of uncertainty. They played their shots, Lavington's ball stopping just shy of the hole, while Jack's lay tantalizingly close. The tension in Jack's chest mounted as the older man prepared his putt, his form steady and confident. Jack's own body felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. His watch ticked to the precise moment. 7:25. He braced himself for the cry, for the piercing voice that had haunted him. And then, nothing. Silence. Relief washed over him, almost dizzying in its intensity. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, shoving his watch higher up his arm as if to distance himself from the phantom moment. Perhaps it was all in his head after all. Lighting his pipe, his hands trembling slightly, he allowed himself to relax for the first time in days. He commented on the beauty of the day, his voice lighter, his soul feeling unburdened. Lavington lined up his next shot, and Jack turned his gaze to the horizon, reveling in the peace of the morning. But then it happened. A woman's voice, sharp and desperate, pierced the calm. "Murder! Help! Murder!" The cry shattered his fragile sense of relief. His pipe fell from his hand, forgotten as he spun toward the sound. His breath caught as he froze, his gaze darting between the direction of the voice and Lavington. And there it was, the answer he had dreaded and needed. Lavington stood still, his eyes shaded as he looked down the course. He had heard it too. Jack's heart pounded with a mix of terror and vindication. This was no hallucination, no trick of his mind. The cry was real, and it demanded answers. Jack staggered, his world spinning violently. He took a stumbling step, but before he could right himself, the ground seemed to tilt beneath him, and he crumpled into the short, damp grass. "Easy there," a voice said, warm but firm, as a pair of hands gently lifted him. Jack blinked in confusion as he found Lavington crouched beside him, his eyes alight with curiosity. "You've got to take it easy now. Don't overdo it." "What happened?" Jack groaned, pressing a hand to his temple as if to stop the world from spinning. "You fainted." "Well, almost. Thought you were going down for good there for a minute," Lavington observed with an amused smirk, sitting down beside Jack on the grass. He lit a pipe, its scent mingling with the cool evening air. "My God," Jack muttered, his voice trailing off as he stared at the horizon, the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him. "Something troubling you?" Lavington asked, his voice suddenly taking on a serious tone. Jack hesitated for a moment, but then, his voice laced with bitterness, he asked, "Why have you been watching me these past 2 days?" Lavington paused, the twinkle in his eye betraying no hint of alarm. "That's an awkward question," he replied, his tone light, as though dancing around the topic. "But a cat can look at a king, can't it?" Jack's face tightened, a deep frustration bubbling to the surface. "Don't play games, I'm serious. Why were you watching me?" Lavington exhaled a puff of smoke and looked at Jack with newfound attention. "All right, let's be straightforward then," he said after a moment's silence. "I recognized in you the unmistakable signs of a man under strain, one whose mind is being pushed to its limits. I wanted to understand what was behind it. I can tell you," Jack responded bitterly, eyes narrowing, "I'm going mad." Lavington studied him carefully for a moment, as though weighing the truth in Jack's words. "Very curious," he muttered. "Very curious indeed." Jack's frustration only deepened. "That's it, is it? Curious? You think I'm joking? I'm telling you I'm losing my mind." Lavington's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. Now, he said, his tone almost paternal. "You're young, and emotions run wild, but I don't think you're mad, not in the way you think. Let's talk." Jack's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You think I'm fine?" Lavington chuckled, tapping his pipe against his knee. "Far from it. You're certainly not fine. But I'm not a doctor, at least not of the body. I'm what you might call a doctor of the soul." Jack stared at him, skeptical. "The soul?" Lavington nodded, his voice firm but compassionate. "Yes, I know it sounds strange, but the soul, or whatever you prefer to call it, the subconscious, the mind, has a way of playing tricks on us. It's not something you can always see or touch, but it's real, and sometimes it's more real than the things we can see with our eyes." Jack blinked, struggling to comprehend. "You think I'm just having a breakdown, then?" "I don't think you're mad, not at all," Lavington replied with a shrug. "But I do think you've been misled by something that isn't as it seems. What exactly is it that's bothering you?" Jack took a deep breath and, despite himself, began to recount the strange occurrences that had plagued him over the past days, the disturbing cry for help he had heard every morning at precisely 7:30 a.m. Lavington listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "And this morning you heard it again?" he asked. Jack nodded, confusion still clouding his mind. "Yeah, I heard it at 7:30 again, but when I looked at my watch it was 5 minutes fast. That's what doesn't make sense, it wasn't right." Lavington stood, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something unseen. "Let me guess. You heard the same cry each morning at the same time, but today you were a bit late in hearing it." Jack hesitated before answering. "Yeah, exactly. I don't get it." The doctor smiled, his demeanor calming. "It's simple, really. Your watch is 5 minutes fast, which means you've been hearing this cry at the exact same time every day, but it doesn't line up with your own perception of time. You heard it at 7:30 a.m., but your watch said something different." Jack's eyes widened as he tried to make sense of the explanation. "But why me? Why should I be the one hearing it?" Lavington's expression turned serious. "Ah, now we enter the realm of the inexplicable. Some people are more attuned to certain things. Some hear and see things that others don't. It's not about ghosts or spirits, it's about perception. The mind, the subconscious, can pick up on things that others miss. But I don't believe in any of that," Jack protested, shaking his head. "No ghosts, no spirits." Lavington chuckled. "And yet here you are, hearing something others don't. It's like a person who can see something the rest of us can't. Does that make them mad?" Jack's mind spun, but the more he listened to Lavington, the more he felt the storm inside him settle, if only just a little. There was something oddly soothing in the doctor's words, even if they didn't quite make sense. "The truth is, Jack," Lavington said quietly, "we don't always have the answers. But I think the answer to your problem isn't madness, but something deeper, something that has yet to reveal itself." Felice paused, her eyes wide with a haunted gleam as she glanced at Jack, her voice a hushed whisper, heavy with the weight of her words. "Monsieur, you must understand. This is not just a dream. For 4 nights I have been visited by the same woman, tall and pale as marble, with eyes that seem to pierce the very soul. In her hands she holds a blue china jar, delicate and fragile, as if it were holding the very essence of life. Her face, so beautiful, yet so filled with sorrow, haunts me still. And every night she reaches out to me, her trembling hands offering me the jar, silently begging me to take it from her. But no matter how I try, no matter how much I wish to understand her, I cannot grasp the meaning of her gesture. She cannot speak, monsieur. Her lips are sealed, and in her eyes I see only desperation." Jack leaned forward, unable to tear his eyes away from her face. His heart raced, each beat louder than the last as her story sank deeper into his thoughts. She continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, barely audible. "The first 2 nights, the dream was the same. But the night before last, everything changed. She vanished, like smoke in the air, slipping away from my grasp. And just when I thought it was over, I heard it, her voice, crying out in the darkness. I know it was her, there is no doubt. Her cry. It haunts me, monsieur. It is as if she is calling for help, but I do not know what she wants. It is the cry of someone lost, someone who cannot find peace. And now I am afraid. What if she needs me to save her? What if I am the only one who can hear her, the only one who can help her?" Felice's words lingered in the air, thick with the unspoken dread that had taken root in her soul. Jack could feel it too now, the chilling weight of her story pressing down on him, as if the very room around them had grown colder. His thoughts raced. The mystery of the cottage, the cries at dawn, the girl from the garden. It was all tying together, and he could feel that the answers were slipping closer, just out of reach. But what did it all mean? Who was this woman in the dream, and what was her connection to the strange happenings around Heather Cottage? He looked at Felice, his voice low and urgent. "Mademoiselle, you must trust me. Whatever it is, we will get to the bottom of this. We will find the answers. You are not alone in this." He reached out, taking her hand in his. The intensity in his gaze made it clear that he was fully committed to uncovering the truth. This was no longer just a mystery. It was something far more personal. He would not rest until he understood what was happening and what role he played in this tangled web of strange occurrences. Felice met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "You promise, monsieur? You promise that you will help me?" "I promise," Jack said firmly, his grip tightening on her hand. "Whatever it takes, I will help you. We will solve this together." The air between them seemed to crackle with an unspoken bond, a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. Jack had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and he would find it, no matter how dark or twisted the path ahead might be. The room was thick with anticipation as the three of them gathered around the small table. Felice, her eyes wide with the faintest glint of hope, watched every movement with intense concentration. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that only the most haunting of mysteries can create. Jack felt his heart racing, not just from the mounting curiosity, but also from the haunting cry for help that still echoed in his mind. It wasn't just a call, it was a warning, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever truth lay hidden in the depths of that cursed blue jar. Lavington, always calm and controlled, exuded a quiet confidence, though Jack could sense a certain urgency behind his every movement. The doctor gently placed the jar on the table, his fingers brushing the cold, smooth porcelain. It was the same jar from the sketch, the one that had been haunting Felice's dreams. The same one that had inexplicably connected all of them, pulling them toward this dark moment in time. "Now," Lavington said, his voice low but steady, "we will see if the jar is indeed the key to this mystery." He reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out a small, delicate instrument. It looked like nothing more than a simple metal rod, but Jack knew better. There was more to Lavington's methods than met the eye. This was no ordinary investigation. Felice looked at him, her face a mask of fear and wonder. "Do you think it will work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lavington gave her a reassuring smile, but Jack could see the subtle flicker of doubt in his eyes. "If the jar holds the answers we seek, it will reveal them to us tonight," he replied, more to himself than to Felice. With a careful hand, Lavington placed the rod at the base of the jar, his fingers dancing lightly over the surface as though he were communicating with it. The room seemed to hold its breath as the minutes dragged on, the silence oppressive. Jack's mind was racing, his nerves were shot. What if nothing happened? What if the answers they were looking for were locked away forever, just out of reach? Then, without warning, the room was pierced by a sharp, unnatural sound. It wasn't the kind of noise a normal object might make. It was something darker, something alive. The jar vibrated slightly, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. He blinked, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The porcelain seemed to ripple, as though some unseen force was pushing against it from within. Lavington stood still, his gaze fixed on the jar, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air grew thicker, almost suffocating, as a faint whisper filled the room. At first, it was just a murmur, barely audible. But then it became clearer. The voice, distressed, panicked, and unmistakably familiar, sounded as if it were coming from deep within the jar itself. "Murder, help, murder, ... The words echoed through the room, sending a chill down their spines. It was the same cry Jack had heard in his dreams, the same cry that had woken him in the dead of night. Felice's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table, her breath shallow and quick. That's the voice. It's the same voice from my dream," she cried out, her voice breaking with the weight of fear and revelation. Jack looked at Lavington, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What does it mean?" he demanded, his voice rising. He couldn't contain the panic that was creeping into his chest. What is happening? Who is it? Who's calling for help? Lavington's expression was unreadable, but Jack could see the gears turning behind those piercing eyes. Slowly, methodically, the doctor reached for the jar, his fingers brushing its surface once more. The murmuring grew louder, the voice more frantic, as if the jar itself were alive with the tortured soul of its former owner. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. Then, with a sudden movement, Lavington lifted the jar, his eyes never leaving its surface. The vibrations ceased instantly, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Jack held his breath, waiting, praying for something, anything, that would explain the mystery. Lavington placed the jar back onto the table, his hands shaking just slightly. "It's clear now," he said quietly, his voice low and intense. "This jar, this object, holds more than just history. It holds a part of a soul, and that soul is crying out for justice." Jack's mind reeled. He couldn't fully grasp what was happening, but the urgency was undeniable. Something was terribly wrong. And the blue jar, the one that had haunted Felice's dreams, was at the center of it all. It wasn't just an inanimate object. It was a vessel, holding the secrets of a tragedy long buried. Felice's face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "But what should we do now? How can we help?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. Lavington looked at her, his expression somber. "We need to uncover the truth behind this woman's death. Only then can we hope to release the restless soul trapped within this jar." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. But one thing was clear: this was no ordinary haunting. The forces at play here were darker, more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. And they were running out of time. The room was thick with anticipation as the three of them gathered around the small table. Felice, her eyes wide with the faintest glint of hope, watched every movement with intense concentration. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that only the most haunting of mysteries can create. Jack felt his heart racing, not just from the mounting curiosity, but also from the haunting cry for help that still echoed in his mind. It wasn't just a call, it was a warning, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever truth lay hidden in the depths of that cursed object. Lavington, always calm and controlled, exuded a quiet confidence, though Jack could sense a certain urgency behind his every movement. The doctor gently placed the artifact on the table, his fingers brushing the cold, smooth surface. It was the same object from the sketch, the one that had been haunting Felice's dreams. The same one that had inexplicably connected all of them, pulling them toward this dark moment in time.